Hi, Steve. Hi, Margot Shepard. And hi, Nancy Blackmar. Margot says hi. How was it? I found it very unsatisfying for a variety of reasons, which I will now go over. And okay, hi, Nancy Blackmar. Margot says hi. How was it? Okay, but give me a minute or two to
Found it
share
very
this.
unsatisfying for a variety of reasons, which I will now go over. And okay, hi, Nancy Blackmar.
Okay, I'll take a minute to share this before I actually start on the evaluation. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take a minute to share this before I actually start
On the evaluation.
Thank you. Actually, start.
Mm. Mm. There we go. Okay, so I'm back in now. Okay, please tell me if my sound is okay before I start. Jim says, hi, all. Just got back from burning my ears listening to the debate. Yeah, I can see why that would be the case. Kay says, I hate these so called debates. Another crap fest, okay, in my opinion. Yeah, I had the same opinion, and so let me tell you why. Okay, or let me tell you all the reasons why. Well, in my view, the number one reason why was because the most important question in a debate, from the standpoint of the various constituencies, I think, or at least the most controversial issue that was raised in the debate, is the issue of how you gonna pay for it. How you gonna pay for it? Okay, and What Bernie did just the other day is to release details of how he was going to pay for it. And in doing that, he must have been getting some polling, okay, that indicated that his answers up to now had been too abstract, okay, in general, and that many people still doubted how he was going to pay for it. So he released his plans and he put them up on the website about last night. Uh, and so today, people came prepared. Okay, okay, they were ready to attack Bernie, and he was attacked by all six other candidates who were up there on stage. And of course, the very question concerning how you want to pay for it was asked and framed in a relatively combative way by the moderators of the debate, specifically with respect to this question by, I think the question was asked by Gayle King, if I recall. Let me see if that's right. Okay, I don't recall now who asked the question, whether it was Gayle King or whether it was Nora O'Donnell, or who exactly it was actually raised the question. Okay, but of course, there were what Bernie did is refer to his plans, and he implied that there really wasn't a sufficient amount of time to answer the question because he thought, okay, it would take hours to go into the details. And of course, he was right about that. So at first, he just concentrated on the Medicare for All question and how he was going to pay for that. And of course, it was very difficult for him to answer that in the 1 minute and 25 seconds that they give somebody to answer a question. I thought rather humorously, one of the panelists said at some time later in the debate, with reference to Joe Biden, saying to Joe that actually 1 minute and 25 seconds was a lot of time to answer a question. Well, obviously, that is going to depend on the question. But when you're asking someone how you're going to pay for a very extensive agenda, you are creating a situation where that person cannot answer that question in 1 minute, okay, and 25 seconds when they're talking about paying for things through taxation. In other words, there's no real general answer to that question. One can say, well, I'm going to tax the rich. Okay, and that would suffice for a short answer, perhaps, because in one way or another, that's most of what Bernie has to say on the subject with his programs. But of course, to make a credible answer on this particular question, you have to go down the various areas, okay, of expenditure, and you have to say what kinds of taxes, and also give some of the details of the taxes so people are able to begin to evaluate whether you can actually pay for it, okay, or not. And so all the candidates on stage started to reply to the questions. And of course, there was a lot of shouting and a lot of talking over each other. And what it came down to was this: since everybody was supposed to have equal time, except for the person who gave an original answer to the question in 1 minute, and 25 seconds, you had a situation where the people who opposed the idea that Bernie's whole program could be paid for got 6 times as much time to reply to Bernie as Bernie got, to reply to all of them. So to the people who ran this particular debate, that may seem completely fair. After all, everybody had an equal amount of time, right? No. Since everybody was criticizing Bernie in connection with the thesis that he had properly laid out his plans to pay for it, the opposition had 6 times the time that Bernie had to actually make his points about how he would pay for it. So the question was asked in a dishonest way, because certainly the moderators knew that he was never going to be able to adequately reply to the question in 1 minute, and 25 seconds, or to reply to the specific objections, of all the others in the 30 seconds, I guess, they get to actually make a reply, of their own. So they very well knew that Bernie wasn't going to be able to successfully answer the question. What they needed to do was immediately, if they were going to be fair, was immediately to recognize, okay, so all you guys disagree with Bernie, and you're all ready to give your reasons why you're going to disagree on this. So therefore, to be fair, we're going to have to give you each 30 seconds to reply, and then we're going to have to give Bernie 30 seconds times 6, or 180 seconds to make his reply to all of you, or give him another 30 seconds in order to reply to each of you in turn, because your criticisms, are not the same, and he has to have an equal time to reply to you, since he's the one that's been placed on the defensive with this particular question. So the structure of the debate was completely unfair in that particular respect. So, of course, I don't think that Bernie answered the question of how you're going to pay for it satisfactorily, but what was particularly galling was that everybody on stage had a different claim about how much Bernie's programs were going to cost. And some people made really outrageous claims. Like Amy Klobuchar said, that Bernie's plans were going to cost 60 trillion over 10 years, 60 trillion more than we spend now over 10 years. And that was 3 times the size of the U.S. Economy. That's what she said later. At one point, she said it was going to be 5 times the size of the economy of the United States. Okay. Well, I have news, for Amy. Okay. The cost of those programs was a cost over 10 years. And the size of the economy at roughly $22.5 trillion now is the size of the economy, in 1 year. So the cumulative size of the economy, now not taking account of any expansion in real terms, but just assuming the economy would not expand at all, except for inflation, over 10 years, even if the economy stayed just as large as it is now, over 10 years, the size of the economy would be 225 trillion. So therefore, if Bernie wants to spend 60 trillion out of 225 trillion, or even 70 trillion, okay, or even 80 trillion, that's nowhere near the size of the economy over 10 years. Amy clearly does not understand economics or even the simple concept of a GDP, and doesn't understand the difference between 1 year of the size of the economy and the size of the economy over 10 years. She doesn't understand that she's comparing apples, okay, and oranges. Okay, or if you want to put it, okay, on a single year basis, okay, an annual basis, then Bernie was at most suggesting that we would be spending on the order of 8 to 8.5 trillion per year. At most, he was suggesting that, and not necessarily in the first year. In the first year, he'd probably be spending something more like 6 trillion. So he was suggesting that we would spend 6 trillion out of an expanded economy, because it's 22.5 trillion now. But of course, as a result of the increase in federal spending from 4 trillion to 6 trillion, we would probably have an expansion, okay, of GDP by 3 trillion. So we'd be talking about, let's say, 6 trillion out of 25 trillion, which is roughly a quarter of the economy. That's all it would be, okay, on a 1 year basis. Okay. So all those people who were claiming he was going to spend many times the size of the economy were economic ignoramuses, because that's not what he was at all suggesting. Okay, and they didn't seem to realize that, and he never had a chance to make a point like this, because obviously I've already spent 5 minutes making this particular point. So in other words, they asked a question that could not be answered successfully without actually going into MMT. And Bernie, of course, has not tried to educate everybody about the economics, okay, of MMT. He wasn't able to familiarize the public with the economics, okay, of MMT. So he also was not able to actually create a situation where he could possibly be understood about how he was going to pay for it, unless he put forward plans for how he was going to pay for his programs essentially by increasing taxation. Now he knows, and we know, that you don't pay for programs using tax revenue. The federal government, the Treasury Department, pays for everything with new money created by the Federal Reserve each time that it has to use more money than is in the Treasury spending account, okay, at a particular time. It has to get that money in the form of new money from the Federal Reserve by doing certain things. Now, I'm not going to spend time here explaining the various things that can be done, or that could be done, or that should be done, okay, to do this, because I spent other programs on this. But the point is that he could not take that tack. He could not say something like, well, look, there's Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. It gives Congress the right to create as much money as we need to fulfill our needs. And that's the way all government programs are paid for right now. So I would pay for these programs in exactly the same way. He could have made that sort of answer in 1 minute and 25 seconds, but everybody would have said to him, "You're talking about printing money? You're talking about printing money? We're going to have hyperinflation. We're going to go nuts. This is not going to happen. The whole economy is going to be destroyed by your plans." So then he would have had to explain, to go back, and to explain, look, we create all our money now. Don't think the tax revenue is paying for anything, because it's not really paying for anything. Now, again, how could Bernie explain that in this brief time in the context of a debate? The point is, he could not. There was no way that he could do this. All he could do was to tell them that he was going to withdraw through taxation as much money out of the economy as he planned to put in the spending. He could tell them something like that, and he could give them the details, which is what he did on his website. Now, his opponents were completely inaccurate at quoting the details, and their idea that somehow he only pays for half of it is probably inaccurate. I haven't had time to add up everything in his plans, because he released them only last night, and there was not the time today to go over it in time for the debate. Nor would the candidates have had the time to go over it. So when they said it did not add up, they were lying. When the moderators said it would not add up, they were lying, because the moderators could not possibly have known whether it would add up or not, because no one would have had the time in this short time to go over it and to make a true claim coming out of their own knowledge that it did not add up. And many people who were making the claims that it did not add up also made those claims from their standpoint of how much they thought the programs were going to cost. And of course, they would construe the programs as costing $90 trillion over 10 years. Someone mentioned the figure of $90 trillion. Someone else mentioned a figure of $60 trillion. Bernie himself mentioned the figure of $60 trillion when he was talking about what we were going to spend on healthcare over 10 years if we stayed with our present system, or if we went with a system like the kind, that Mayor Pete was advocating for. Bernie knew that was going to cost $60 trillion, or at least he thought he knew, because the Brookings Institution had estimated that the Mayor Pete type of program, the public option type of program, was going to cost $60 trillion or $6 trillion a year, over 10 years on the average. So Bernie correctly quoted what their claims were for their own costs. But they constantly tried to bring up the idea that Bernie was going to spend a whole lot more than they were going to spend. And the whole thing was disingenuous, because what Bernie was talking about is what our national healthcare spending would be over 10 years. And what they were talking about is what they would have the government spend on our national healthcare spending. But that in itself is completely disingenuous and completely misleading, because all of the government spending that they would have the government do would be matched by taxes. So in effect, the private sector would be spending the whole $60 trillion. They'd be spending something like, let's say, I don't know, for example, about $3 trillion per year, or $30 trillion, and paying taxes along with that spending of $30 trillion to withdraw that much money out of the private sector. And then, in addition, we'd be spending all the additional money, we being the private sector, would be spending all the additional money on premiums and deductibles and copays and all the other health spending not covered by government programs, just the sheer out of pocket kinds of spending. Okay, we would be, the private sector would be spending the whole amount, the whole 60 trillion. Okay, but under Bernie's plan, the estimates for Medicare for all come to between, okay, they vary, but they come to between 30 trillion and 40 trillion over 10 years, or $3 to $4 trillion a year over 10 years, depending on who you talk to. In my view, it would be closer to $3 trillion over the 10 years than to $4 trillion on the average each year for 10 years. So those estimates were varying from person to person, and they were all criticizing what Bernie had to say from their point of view about the total amount of spending that was going to go on. In order to really answer them, what Bernie would have had to have done is to disentangle what each one had to say, and to say, well, we disagree on the amount of spending that it's going to cost. My cost estimates are that this would cost $4 trillion. You're suggesting it would cost $6 trillion. There's no way it would cost $6 trillion, because it doesn't cost anything like that anywhere else where there's a Medicare for All program. It just doesn't. You're not telling the truth about what it costs. But he would have had to do this with each one of the critics, all six, and then he would have had to say, we've had very good economists who have evaluated the actual likely cost of my plan over 10 years once it's implemented. And they say it's going to be between, let's say, $30 trillion over 10 years and $40 trillion over 10 years, and that it's not going to go over that. So we're going to save a pile of money. That's what Bernie should have said. Okay. Anyway, for me, that was the highlight, of the debate. Okay, another highlight of the debate, and when I say it was a highlight of the debate, I really mean it was a low light, of the debate. So the other low light of the debate came from Bernie saying, sorry, I had to refresh my screen, so you might have gotten, a bit of a break. Okay, the low light for the campaign was that the moderators, CBS, spent very little time on Green New Deal issues. Almost no time on that at all. Steve Wolfbrand points out the audience was rigged to Bloomberg. The tickets were super expensive. Yeah, so they rigged the audience. I didn't realize that, but I'm sure that is true. They rigged the audience. But more than rigging the audience, they gave short shrift to the climate emergency problem. Only a few words were gotten in edgewise by Bernie and by Tom Steyer, and by some of the others. So therefore, Bernie didn't get to talk about his climate emergency plan. And none of the others had to exhibit their own lack of knowledge about the climate emergency to the American people. The issue of the survival of all of us got short shrift in this particular debate. Got short shrift. And yes, Steve, Petey wouldn't shut up while Bernie was talking. And by the way, at one point in the debate, towards the end, Pete got to distort a foreign policy reply he got a chance to make a foreign policy reply, and he distorted the foreign policy reply. Okay, let me get my notes here. I'm sorry, I had 5 pages of notes on this thing. Yeah, when Pete was asked about the bombing of the city, okay, of Idlib in Syria, he said he stood, okay, with Idlib and then says we have to alter the balance of power there. Well, just how are we going to alter the balance of power in the Middle East? How are we going to alter the balance of power in Syria without keeping our troops there? He neglected to mention we would have to put in a lot of troops there to alter the balance of power there. The balance of power right there, okay, is in favor of the Syrians and the Russians because we correctly have ceased to compound the destruction there by withdrawing our troops. But then Pete quickly pivoted to a Medicare for All criticism of Bernie, saying no other government in the world completely eliminates the role of private insurance in healthcare. So Pete got in that criticism, and Bernie was given no chance to answer whatsoever. Okay, no chance to answer. It never got back to him. So there was a completely out of order attack on Medicare for All by Pete. And none of the moderators called him out on it, and none of the moderators gave Bernie gave him a chance to reply. Now, what is true is that Bernie has said that there wouldn't be a role for private insurance in healthcare benefits covered by the Medicare for All plan. But he has never said that private insurance would be prohibited from being sold in connection with other benefits that are not part of the Medicare for All bill that he has introduced. So private insurance would still exist for those kinds of things. It's just that the role of private insurance would be reduced to a very small fraction of what goes on in the healthcare benefits area. And that, is all to the good, because all people would be able to afford then the necessary benefits in healthcare that are in Bernie's bill. So Pete is right in saying that no other government has completely eliminated the role of private insurance, but he's wrong in saying that Bernie's bill would eliminate the role of private insurance. The bill doesn't say that. He needs to read the bill, and Bernie should have been given a chance to tell him he needs to read that bill because it doesn't entirely abolish the role of private insurance in healthcare. There are still certain luxury items in healthcare that can be insured by the private insurance companies if they care to go there. Okay. Now, of course, some other crazy things about this particular debate. Okay, and by the way, when decisions were made in the debate, they were always made in such a way that were biased against Bernie, because of course CBS is part of the plutocracy and is against Bernie. For example, they started out with cataloging what the problems are for the front runner, Bernie Sanders. And as I summarize them, The first problem they talked about was saying nice things about Fidel Castro and saying nice things about China. Okay, and then they brought up as an introductory item before the debate actually started. In other words, in the background, okay, for the debate, that the revenue that Bernie has mentioned in his plan for how to pay for Medicare for all doesn't add up. Now, they didn't prove that it doesn't add up. They didn't show that it doesn't add up. They just asserted at the front, up front, that the revenue doesn't add up and that that's a problem for him. Well, I seriously doubt that his problem in having revenue that adds up is more serious than the problems of the criticisms that the critics are making of his plan, okay, for paying for it, because judging from their comments on the debate stage, they had no idea about the specifics of how he was going to pay for it, and they couldn't point out at all on a point by point basis why they thought that his revenue didn't add up. They just kept saying, oh, you got to do the math better, Bernie. You got to do the math better, Bernie. I'm convinced they needed to do the math better. A lot better. Because they're a lot worse at doing math than Bernie Sanders and his particular staff. Then they also called out, of course, the inevitable Bernie Bros trolls. Sanders supporters are so vociferous, they troll critics, okay, of Bernie and are like the Trump supporters. No, we are not like the Trump supporters. Our criticisms are fact-based. And if we sometimes get passionate concerning our criticisms, that doesn't mean that our criticisms are not fair, are not on the point, and are not factual. And then they raised a fourth area. Actually, they didn't raise a fourth area at front, but they moved to the first question of the debate. And basically, the first question was, well, considering the low unemployment rates we have now and how well the economy has been doing, how can a democratic socialist do better for the economy than President Trump? And I thought Bernie gave a perfect answer for this, pointing out that, well, right now the economy was a wonderful economy for the billionaires, but it was not good for most Americans. At this point, everyone ganged up on Bernie with their favorite charge. Bernie tried to bring the discussion back to his issues, to money in politics, to free college, okay, to Medicare for all, but he did not get enough time to go on to the other issues because the moderators allowed all this cross-talking and ganging up and shouting. They just did a terrible job, and one that was terribly biased against Bernie Sanders. So Gayle King then moved on to the issue of black support, okay, and raised that, okay, to Joe Biden. He basically said, we're leading in black support and we will win in South Carolina. And he never really got called on that. Then she moved on to Mayor Bloomberg and asked him some more awkward questions about what he did with the school system, okay, in the city of New York, and his problems with stop and frisks, and how he victimized the minority communities. Mayor Bloomberg didn't reply successfully to that. He lied about his black support, but he was able to initially get away with it. I think he was able to get away with it, actually, for the whole of the debate. He wasn't really buttonholed on it. in spite of the fact that there were two blacks on the panel. Amy was then asked whether Bloomberg's policies were racist. And she said yes, but then said, refused to continue the critique, of Bloomberg, and then said, the question is, but where do we go from here? And she offered a lot, of generalities about where we go from here, which to me weren't very persuasive or convincing. And Warren was asked why. She said that Mayor Bloomberg was the most risky candidate. I thought she gave a good reply, and she said, he's risky because he has a long record of being a Republican and supporting and funding Republicans in the past. She charged he cannot earn the trust of the Democratic Party. Okay, I thought that was a pretty good reply by Warren, but I thought that she could have made, the simple point, saying to the moderators and saying to the DNC, and I think this is what she should have done. She should have said, the DNC, in letting Mayor Bloomberg into this particular debate, has let a Republican into this debate to debate the Democrats. She could have said, all the rest of us here, are Democrats. And she could have said, yes, I know that Bernie Sanders isn't registered as a Democrat. He's registered, as an independent, but his programs are all Democratic types of programs. And Mr. Bloomberg's programs are all Republican types, of programs. Now, they're not all Trump's programs, but they're certainly Bush types, of programs. And then she could have gone on to describe the mayor's support of the foreign policy initiatives of George Bush. So Bloomberg answered by saying he's trained for this job, and he's run a city bigger than most countries, which is a lie. The city of New York is 7 million, but it's not bigger than most countries. It's not even bigger than Greece, which is a relatively small country, but it has 11 million people in it. So the city of New York, as big as it is not bigger than most countries. In fact, there are many cities in the world that are now a good deal bigger than New York. In any case, Warren brought up, the misogyny, of the mayor in a dramatic way, and kept calling for a blanket release from the NDAs he made the women he victimized by sign. And Norah O'Donnell asked the mayor about his jokes and the appropriateness of his jokes, and he admitted they probably were not appropriate, but then hit back, against Warren and asked her when she was going to move on, when she was going to stop talking about this. And he denied ever saying that his employee should kill that baby. So Warren went back to a release of all of the NDAs. And he said, we are doing this, which I suspect is a lie. I suspect that's just a flat out lie, by Bloomberg. But he wasn't called on it by the CBS people. At that point, it was Norah who brought up how Bernie was going to pay for his programs and claimed that the math did not add up. And Bernie answered and asked whether she had hours. And she said, we have 2 hours. But then, of course, she turned around and she did not give him 2 hours to answer. She gave him a limited time to answer that I spoke of. They didn't give him time to answer the question. So anyway, I'm not going to go into all the silly individual comments. I don't think Bernie was able to answer them successfully. They all made some general claims like We've gotten more things done than Bernie ever has. Okay, nobody ever mentioned that Bernie was known as the Amendment King when he was in the House, and that he's been very successful in his relatively limited time in the Senate compared to Joe Biden as well. Also, when you're talking about things done, you have to ask the question, what did they get done? Much of what Joe Biden got done was very bad for people. Very, very bad for people. The credit card bill, for example. The crime bill in 1995. The Iraq War. I mean, yeah, he got a lot done. No, thank you. Get out of here. We don't need any more of that to be done. Anyway, I want to note the simple point that when it comes time for Bernie to debate with Donald Trump on a debate stage, Bernie will get equal time in a debate with Trump. Not 1/7 of the total time to answer a bunch of varying attacks about how he's going to pay for it. He won't have any trouble at all debating Trump on how he's going to pay for it. No trouble, okay, at all. In fact, okay, if he was debating Trump, he could even mention that he'd be quite willing to deficit spend, since Trump has deficit spend all over the place. Okay, and Bloomberg then brought up the idea that how many Republican moderates are going to vote for Bernie? Well, I think the polls show that some of the Republican moderates will vote for Bernie against Trump. But the polls also show that only 28% of the eligible voters are going to be Republicans. And 43% are going to be independents. So the issue is not so much how many Republican moderates are going to vote for Bernie, and by implication, okay, are going to vote for Bloomberg because he's really a Republican, okay, and not a Democrat. The real issue is how many Democrats are going to vote for a Republican in Democratic clothing, like Bloomberg, and how many independents are going to vote for Bernie as opposed to a Bloomberg type. Those are the real questions. So the real question is Bernie's support, okay, among the indies, not so much the support he has among the moderates in the Republican Party. I don't think he cares a damn about getting the votes, okay, of the moderates of the Republican Party. That's what did Hillary Clinton in 2016, and that's what will do Bloomberg in. But Bernie is not going to be done in by this because he's going to get entirely new voters to the polls. Then they spent a lot of time talking about gun violence and Bernie's position on the filibuster. I personally think Bernie has a weakness on the filibuster. That it's past time that he said that in order to pass the legislation we need to survive, he would be willing to get rid of the filibuster if that was the only way that he could do it. I think he needs to claim that. He needs to claim that with respect to Medicare for all. He needs to claim that with respect to Green New Deal legislation. He needs to claim that with respect to all of his legislation. That he will threaten to get rid of the filibuster and that he will go through with it. If the minority keeps on frustrating the will of the majority with respect to these bills. And he would have the support of the people in getting rid of the filibuster. So anyway, Mayor Pete invoked Harry Reid on the filibuster and said that Reid supports getting rid of the filibuster. Listen, I don't want to hear that right now, because if Harry Reid had gotten rid of the filibuster in early January of 2009, we might have had the passage of a Medicare for All bill at the beginning of 2009. But Harry Reid refused to do that. Therefore, Harry Reid was responsible for the requirement, or what at the time was thought to be a requirement, for the Democrats to get 60 votes in favor of the health insurance reform bill they wanted to pass, and which then led to their desperately trying to get some Republican votes and make it a nonpartisan thing. There would have been no need to seek any nonpartisan support for it at all if Harry Reid had gotten rid of the filibuster. So I don't want to hear now that he wants to get rid of the filibuster. That's too little and too late. And you know very well that if Mayor Pete had been in the Congress at that time, he wouldn't have advocated for getting rid of the filibuster. He's a centrist and donor bought. And he would have wanted to use the filibuster in the same way Obama used it, to block the passage of a Medicare for All bill. Anyway, I thought Bernie's answers on the NRA question, on that part of the violence question, were good, but I thought he shouldn't have ignored the filibuster attack. We've heard that too many times, and he's got to begin to answer that in a satisfactory way. I know he answers it by saying he would pass these things with a reconciliation bill, but there are certain things, like a gun violence bill, you can't pass with a reconciliation bill, nor can you do reconciliation too many times in a single year. I think you're limited to using it only once or something like that. Okay, and that's not enough to pass Bernie's whole program. I mean, reconciliation would suffice for some of it, but for the rest of it, one is going to have to get rid of the filibuster. Anyway, there ensued a bunch of extra discussion on this, which I don't think was of very much importance. It seemed like a lot of noise to me. I don't think anybody actually made particularly good points. Amy's points about her programs, on how she would improve the poverty situation, okay, in our rural areas, and provide for better health care, okay, in rural areas, were really underwhelming. Whenever Amy Klobuchar talks about her policies, they're always underwhelming policies that will not solve outstanding problems. She is wasted on that stage. She is the source of so much noise. Bloomberg said something interesting concerning his public health actions, okay, when he was the mayor, okay, of New York. He said in his 12 years, he claimed that the life expectancy of New Yorkers grew by 3 years when he was in office. Now, he was claiming that was due to his public health actions. But I don't know. I think there's room for doubt on this, because when he was the mayor of New York for 12 years, a good part of the population of New York, the poor population of New York, had to relocate to suburban areas and were replaced with wealthy people who could afford to pay for the housing in New York, okay, in those areas. And the growth in life expectancy could simply be due to the changes in the types of residents that were in New York City over his 12 years, okay, in office. So Joe Biden was asked about what he thought about the problem of increasing life expectancy of the American people, and said he would fund DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and get them to figure out a technocratic solution to how to improve life expectancy in the city. I'll tell you, based on what's going on, okay, in other countries, I can tell you the solution to improving life expectancy by 3 or more years in the United States is to pass the Medicare for All bill. It's not for DARPA to come up with technocratic solutions. That was ridiculous, and nobody called Joe Biden on that. Why didn't they call him on that? Because everybody on that stage was biased against the Medicare for All bill except for Bernie Sanders. And Bernie didn't have the time to reply to that kind of idiocy. Then we got to talk about legalization of marijuana and the answers people made to Bernie's wanting to legalize it on day one. So Amy said, well, maybe not on day one because you got to do this in the right way, so you got to pass some laws, and then mention we've got to act on opioids too because that's a very serious problem. Yes, Amy, you're right about that. Those are very serious problems. In other words, she didn't say anything that was materially different from what Bernie Sanders would say, but it just sounded a little different. But in Mayor Bloomberg's case, he doesn't want to legalize it, but he would expunge records of people who were convicted for possession of marijuana. And he would not take the legalization away from the states that have already legalized it, which means that if he ever got into office, a whole bunch of states would quickly legalize it, so he wouldn't be taking it away from them, right? And then he said that we ought to decriminalize it. So in other words, the answers on that were not the Bernie Sanders types of answers. They were all answers that were half a loaf answers or qualified. So if you're in it for the legalization of marijuana, you care a lot about that, then Bernie's certainly your candidate. Then they talked about foreign policy. And Warren was asked about her wanting to roll back on the military, and she talked about a more balanced foreign policy with a strong State Department, and more diplomacy, while keeping the military strong, of course. In other words, she was talking about an Obama type of foreign policy. She gave an answer that was pretty similar to answers given by Obama in 2008. But Bloomberg said he would not pull back all troops in the Middle East. He says it is irresponsible to do that, and he complimented how the military was planning its spending for future wars. So basically he's indicating he's not going to pull back all our troops in the Middle East, which is code for saying we're still going to have our military involved in the Middle East and vulnerable to attacks. So it's likely that we're going to be spending on future wars in order at least to defend them. And of course, if we're going to defend them, we might sometimes have to have surges and go further. So he's not saying really that we have to get out. He's saying basically that under him, we would probably stay in. And Mayor Pete was saying we have to restore our credibility with our allies. And he attacked Trump because he's been very rude to our allies, and of course he has the Kurds in mind here. And Mayor Pete emphasized the importance, of our intelligence, our military intelligence, and listening to our military intelligence. Not surprisingly so, since he worked so closely with military intelligence when he was in the Middle East. Amy was asked whether she would close borders to Americans who had been exposed to the coronavirus. And she said we have to give them some help. Says this is so serious that it's not a political issue, and she didn't say much else. And Biden was asked about CDC, and he said we stopped Ebola, and he did that because he helped to create the agency that actually stopped it. And he made a strong statement saying, I handled that. I have no idea to what extent that was true. He lies about things like that to a great extent, so he has to be fact checked on it. He then made a strong statement about needing access to China and insisting on it. Great. What would he do if China insists on not giving access to the United States? No one asked him about that. And of course, he completely ignored that issue. I mean, what's he going to do? Bomb China? Anyway, Bernie replied by attacking Trump's view that the corona emergency will be over in 2 months, called it, a global problem, and called for a global initiative to handle things like new and novel diseases that emerge in various sections of the world as a result of problems caused by the climate emergency. So he connected this to the Green New Deal in some way. And Mayor Bloomberg was asked about his saying that Xi Jinping is not a dictator and has a constituency. And he defended continuing engagement with China and insists that Xi is not a dictator and is beholden to a political constituency, specifically the Politburo. He's probably not only beholden to the Politburo, he's probably beholden to the Central Committee of the Communist Party as well. But anyway, I kind of agree, with Bloomberg that he's not a classical dictator in the sense of like Chairman Mao, like Chairman Mao was. He's not a dictator with the power, of Joe Stalin, or Hitler. I don't think China is a classical totalitarian state. I think it's much more similar to General Motors, in the way it's run. But just now, sorry, General Motors, but I think that's the truth of it. So Biden said that Xi Jinping is a thug who persecutes, who is constantly persecuting the Uyghurs. Of course, it would be easy for Maduro, in Venezuela, to claim that Donald Trump, is a thug, but because of the sanctions that he has instituted towards his country and 60,000 people or so that have died there as a result of those particular sanctions. And he would probably add all the fatalities that have also resulted from U.S. sanctions, in other countries. The point is, a lot of this name calling is just that. It's actually propaganda. Biden also claimed that he knew Xi Jinping better than anyone else on the stage. Well, maybe Mayor Bloomberg knows him better. I don't know. It's perfectly possible. He has big interests in China. He might have dealt with Xi quite frequently, okay, in the past. And he may know him better. And that's one of the problems, okay, with Mayor Bloomberg. He has big interests in China. Those interests are vulnerable to hostile actions by the Chinese government. So, would he run foreign policy in such a way that it's compatible with the interests of the United States? Or would his first priority be to run foreign policy in such a way that it doesn't make Xi Jinping sufficiently angry to take away the assets of the then President of the United States in China, Mr. Bloomberg? In other words, I think we do have to worry about that. We keep saying the billionaires are not beholden to anybody, but they are beholden to people who have a hold on their assets. So Trump is beholden to many dictators around the world because they can deprive him of assets. And by electing Mayor Bloomberg, we're electing someone who might be beholden to foreign authorities who have control over his assets in foreign countries. Right? We can't continue to ignore these issues when we're dealing with the plutocrats. They have big assets in foreign countries which can be held hostage in return for friendly foreign policies on the part of the United States. So then came the issue of releasing his tax returns, and Warren attacked Mayor Bloomberg because he has not released his tax returns and said he wouldn't be releasing them until after Super Tuesday. And now this happens to be very convenient, okay, for Bloomberg, because once we're through with Super Tuesday, Bloomberg will be able to see what his chances are to block Bernie Sanders from getting the presidency. I'm sure if Bernie Sanders does extremely well on Super Tuesday and it looks like he's unstoppable, that Bloomberg will probably declare that he's no longer in the race, so he won't have to release his tax returns, right? I'm fully expecting that to happen. So not being able to display the tax returns until after Super Tuesday is a very convenient response for the mayor. But anyway, regardless, he stood his ground to Warren, okay, and said that when he was the mayor of New York, he released his tax returns for 12 years, and he plans on doing something similar after Super Tuesday. Tom Steyer said he has already released his for 10 years. Okay, and Mayor Pete says that he has too. Okay, but Mayor Pete, of course, is a comparably poor man compared to the others. So there's not much in his tax returns that can give him any problem. So his releasing his tax returns at this point really doesn't mean anything. Anyway, Tom Steyer then commented on how climate emergency is the most serious issue we have right now, and we're not talking about that. We're talking about all kinds of other things. Then the conversation went back to whether Bernie was somehow being disloyal by making favorable statements, truthful statements about the educational achievements in Cuba, and also in saying that China has some very major accomplishments, which he has detailed, okay, in other contexts. Okay, so Bernie was asked about that. And he's pointed out, yes, he did make those statements, but that those were true statements, and that one has to recognize what is going on in other countries. Okay, and Bernie said that he has always pointed out and has always opposed authoritarianism all over the world, in Cuba, in China, in Saudi, and he mentioned a whole bunch, okay, of other countries as well. Other countries in which the U.S. under Obama and Biden and Clinton, okay, and everybody else, in which we've supported the authoritarian dictators in those countries continuously. while Bernie has opposed them continuously, including the authoritarians in China and in Cuba. So Bernie is pointing out his consistency on this issue and the inconsistency of everybody else on that stage. So Biden popped up and said that Obama has acknowledged things that were accomplished in other nations, but has never embraced dictatorships. Okay, Bernie was not given a chance to answer that when it was obviously directed at him. But the obvious answer is, well, Bernie has never embraced any dictatorships either. He doesn't embrace dictatorships. In fact, he even opposes right-wing neo-fascist governments such as the government of Israel right now. He made that clear later on, okay, in the debate. Okay, and Mayor Pete condemned Bernie's love for the politics of the 60s, and he mentioned someone else's love for the politics of the 90s, I believe. He was probably talking about Joe Biden, but I missed that. So anyway, then Bernie and Pete started talking over each other. I thought that Bernie won that because he was more successful at talking over Pete than Pete was in talking over Bernie. But it was at that level, okay, at that point, because the moderators wouldn't stop them, would not try to stop them. Anyway, Klobuchar then took to the same theme, okay, as Mayor Pete had used earlier in the debate, talking about the extremes of the Democratic Party that were contending, okay, in this election right now, specifically Mayor Bloomberg on the right-wing extreme and Bernie, okay, on the left-wing extreme. And she thought that the way to beat Trump was not to go with one of the extremes and not to spend $60 trillion, which is 3 times the American economy. No, sorry, it's not. It's only about, even the $60 trillion is only about a quarter of the American economy over 10 years, as I said before. Okay, and she also talked about her involvement in the opening to Cuba, in supporting Obama's openings to Cuba, that she worked with Obama on. And Bernie answered this by talking about his far greater favorability among the American people when compared with Mayor Bloomberg or Klobuchar or anybody else on that stage. And he was absolutely right about that. Okay. So Biden was then asked about, would he launch a retaliatory cyber attacks? He never really answered that question. He just fulminated a lot about how they're interfering with our elections right now. He also said that in the Obama administration, they weren't able to do anything about it because they didn't have the info to prove that it was the Russians who were doing that. So that's why they didn't do anything about it, implying kind of that he might do retaliatory cyber attacks. So Steyer then answered and said, where is the commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, in opposing these cyber attacks? And then said, he is nowhere. And then he attacked Trump and the Republicans for not engaging in retaliatory cyber attacks. Then Bernie was asked about the AIPAC question and whether he would shift the capital of Israel back from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. And he said, well, he certainly would take under consideration trying to get the Israelis to move the capital back to Tel Aviv, but said, here's the point. We have a right-wing racist government, okay, in Israel that is denying rights to the Palestinians, human rights to the Palestinians. And he said, we can't continue to support that, basically. And he said, he basically was saying, that's what AIPAC doesn't like, and that's why they criticize him. And he also implied, of course, that they're way off base in criticizing him. And they're at fault because they're favoring a right wing racist government, okay, in Israel. So Michael Bloomberg said, you have to keep the capital where it is and seek a compromise solution. Because once the capital is there, it's not really going anywhere. Okay, but Bloomberg didn't say what kind of compromise solution he favored, whereas Warren came out for the two-state solution and says we have to be a good ally, okay, of both sides. He did not address the question of what to do about the many people on both sides who think it is long past time to have a two-state solution. The people on the ground there, both on the Arab side and on the Israeli side, would have to be persuaded once again that a two-state solution, okay, was viable. And I don't see that one of these, okay, is viable, okay, unless the Israelis would move the Israeli settlers out of the West Bank and other areas in Palestine, because how can we have a two-state solution there with the kind of division of Palestine that has taken place since the last war there and the occupation of the West Bank, okay, and the Gaza Strip. In other words, Israel has created a patchwork there and let Orthodox Jews move in, okay, and settle there in such a way that it precludes the existence of an independent Palestinian state. It's going to be awfully hard to get the Arabs to accept a two-state solution unless those Israelis who have settled in what was to be the Arab areas of Palestine are taken back to Israel. I don't think the Israelis will ever do that. So I'm not sure what kind of solution is in the offing, but the idea of a two-state solution as sort of a general idea without going into details at this point in history is really silly. So other issues came up. I mentioned the bombing of the city, okay, of Idlib, and there was a North Korean issue that came up, okay, as well. Okay, and then they did what I consider to be one of the most stupid things, the kind of stupid things these network people always did. With, according to the schedule, 6 minutes left in the debate, 6 minutes for all 7 people. They asked the 7 people to give us the greatest of the misconceptions about them, their candidacy, and also the motto that actually represent best what those people think. And so they all gave short answers to that, which meant absolutely nothing. For example, but Pete said the biggest misconception of him is that he's not a passionate man. And he said he is, but he thinks what's needed is discipline, okay, to go along with the compassion. And of course, he viewed himself as really strong, okay, in discipline. Now, from what we've seen of his discipline, starting off the race as a strong supporter, okay, of Medicare for All, and then when he got new donations, okay, from donors, suddenly shifting over to Medicare for All for those who want it, completely dishonestly labeling what he wants, which is not a Medicare for All, either for those who want it or those who do not want it. I don't think that was a disciplined act. I think that was a craven and highly cowardly act, and completely expedient, and did not exhibit any kind of discipline that we should be concerned about. And he also said, in other words, when he got asked about his motto, he basically said, we need to treat others as we would be treated. In other words, the golden rule. Well, Pete, it's perfectly obvious that a heavy majority of the American people would like to be treated with the Medicare for All program even better than Bernie's, if that is possible. So you need to be in favor of giving them that if you believe in the golden rule. So you obviously do not believe in the golden rule, because you're not for that. You want to give them what your donors will accept. That's what you want to give them. So you're a hypocrite, Pete. And Mayor Bloomberg said, the misconception is that he's 6 feet tall. I don't know who has that misconception, okay, but everybody laughed at his silly joke. And that his motto is that he's trained for this all his life and will certainly do things when he gets in. Well, how does that distinguish the mayor from Donald Trump? I mean, he might have not have trained himself all his life for this, but he certainly did a lot of things when he got in. Unfortunately, they're bad for most of us, okay, on most issues, and they're terrible, and they inflict all kinds of pain on all kinds of people. So it's not enough to say you're certainly going to do things when you get in. And the same goes for Amy Klobuchar. We don't want to know that you're going to do things when you get in. We want to know what you're going to do when you get in. Both of them have been a little bit short in telling us what they would do when they get in, as Mayor Pete has been. He's been a little short on that. Most of them have been short on that. They've all been short on that, except for Bernie and Warren. They've all been short on that. And we know Warren is constantly hedging her bets as well. Anyway, that's my take on this debate. I think it was incompetently handled, incompetently handled by CBS. If CBS was interested in having a fair debate. On the other hand, if CBS was interested in trying to run Bernie off the track, if their purpose, okay, in this particular debate was to prevent Bernie Sanders from actually winning the debate and continuing on with his progress towards a nomination, I suppose they did that in a pretty competent way, okay, unless the people who were looking on, okay, are sufficiently perspicacious to understand that this was a totally unfair debate and that CBS should be penalized for that by the people out there increasing the level of their support for Bernie Sanders. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick look at your comments. Then I think it's going to be time to say goodnight. I think I was pretty clear on my evaluation of this particular debate. I hope I was pretty clear anyway. I had some pretty strong views on it. I was sorry that it was a waste of time for Bernie. But maybe it wasn't a waste of time because sometimes those who are watching a debate have, in the hall, are reacting to it in an entirely different way from the people who are watching the debate at home. And we will find out in the coming days how people actually reacted to this particular debate. I imagine Bernie will be campaigning hard in South Carolina between now, and also the election, and that his ground game is going to be great in South Carolina. And maybe the networks will hear about the terrible job they've been doing on these debates, and particularly CBS. Doc, so you think that Bloomberg is essentially friendly to China? I don't think it's a question of friendly, or unfriendly. I think that Bloomberg wants to work with China for the sake of his interests there, and that he won't do anything that is in the United States' interest, but that at the same time will oppose his financial interests in China. I think he's compromised by his financial investments in China. He has to be. He has to be compromised. And how do I know he's compromised? Because he obviously cares about his $60 billion. If he didn't care about his $60 billion, a great deal, he never would have jumped into the presidential race. And so Linda Burton greets me and says, "Hi, Joe. Haven't seen you in a long time. So good to hear your common sense." Well, thank you, Linda. Kay says, "I wonder if the banks will close down due to the losses." I'm not sure which losses you're actually talking about. Okay. Yes, I do think, that Bloomberg will have a bias towards getting along with China, as Donald Trump has been accused of having a bias towards getting along with Russia. In fact, I can just hear it now. If we were ever to elect Bloomberg, certainly the Russians would be accusing him of having a bias in favor of China, just as today we accuse them of having a bias in favor, of Russia. In other words, we might hear talk, of of Beijing Mike or Beijing Bloomberg, to rhyme it. Just as today we hear talk of how's the jingle go? Oh yeah, Moscow Mitch, Putin's little bitch, right? In other words, that's what we do to the Republicans. So they're going to start talking about, well, it's Beijing Bloomberg who's running for the Democrats this time. How can we elect Beijing Bloomberg? I don't think that's going to go very well in the campaign. Sandy says, "Try leaving and coming back." Teresa says, "My sound keeps cutting off and on." Anyone else? Sandy says that hers is okay, and Kay says that hers is okay also. So it's probably your computer, Teresa. And Kay says, Wall Street has had some very bad days this week. Well, maybe so, but They're probably far from the banks actually closing down because Trump is probably going to bail the banks out. Yes, honey. Bonnie said something to me. Okay, I don't know what she said. So, Sandy Degg says that Bloomberg slipped up during the debate when he said he bought, quote unquote, actually used that word, candidates, but he quickly self corrected. I was surprised, okay, that no one actually jumped on it. Yeah, probably Bernie was too busy fending off attacks from all six other people to reply to that little thing. Susan Eldridge says Bernie is beating Biden, okay, with Alcoholics Anonymous. Is that what you meant, Susan? I don't think so. Sandy said, I don't think any women will be voting for Bloomberg. I don't know, Sandy. There were an awful lot of women who voted for Trump, who's been even worse than Bloomberg. So I don't know about that. I just don't know. I'm refreshing my page again, by the way. Sorry. And Warren Chamberlain said, I think it was not a fair debate. And Sandy said, God bless you. I don't know who Sandy was blessing, but whoever she was blessing, I'm sure deserves it. Okay, I think I'm going to say goodnight, or I'm just about to say goodnight because right now I cannot see myself. Okay, my machine. I think my camera has gone off and that I have to turn it on again. Here we go. I think I'm on again, but it may not have shown up on your computers yet. But I am on again. I see myself in XSplit. So okay, am on again. Okay, I'm going to leave, but I want to remind you to please share, like, and subscribe. And please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I'd like to remind you also, as well, that I don't do sufficiently often. I'm here for New Macro Media, okay, which is an LLC. It's an Oregon LLC. I'm one of the principals, okay, of the LLC. So, most of my live streams are on behalf, okay, of New Macro Media right now, but they go out, okay, on my page because I have actually a lot more friends than New Macro Media has yet. So there's a larger audience then. So that's why we do it, okay, in this way. Now tomorrow night, what I'm going to do is Okay, I'm going to be repeating my analysis of savings that would go to couples, okay, if Bernie's whole agenda was passed for seniors over 65. That's based on my experience, okay, and Bonnie's experience, but I still think, okay, it would be of value to other people, in spite of the fact that I think that everybody's experience is going to be somewhat different, so everybody's savings are going to be somewhat different. But I still think that my treatment, okay, is illuminating, so okay, I'm going to be repeating it tomorrow night, and I'll do a special event on Facebook to publicize that, and I'll be asking you to share that far and wide tomorrow. I'll probably post a special event, but later tonight, as soon as we get off here, if Facebook still will actually let me post a special event. Okay, I'm not sure that it will. So thank you for coming and thank you for staying. I see there's still 8 of you here, and it's getting late, so I'm very grateful that you stayed this long and that you came. And I will hopefully see you tomorrow night back at my regular time, which is roughly 9 p.m. Have a good night.